Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for Craftworld, Eldar.com. I'm Brent, and today I'm marking something momentous that has happened. We finally crossed the 10,000 subscriber mark, and to mark the occasion, I'm here with a celebrity guest so accomplished in the world of Warhammer 40,000 that some of my patrons just about peed themselves with excitement when they heard that he was coming on. He's the author of the majority of the Black Library stories centered on our beloved space elves, including all three Path novels. He's the creator of the 3rd edition Eldar Codex, the accidental father of the Ynnari, and the creator of numerous other games and stories. It can only be Gav Thorpe. Welcome to the channel, Gav.
Thank you. What a wonderful introduction.
Oh, thank you. So before we dive into Eldar lore, I have to ask, it seems like you've had just about every job at Games Workshop that my nerdy heart could dream of wanting. When I was a kid, I remember seeing your pictures in battle reports and White Dwarf magazine. You were literally getting paid to play Warhammer. And then later your name appeared on codexes and supplements and standalone novels. Can you briefly tell us how you ended up living the dream?
Yes, I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time and made the most of that opportunity, I suppose. I joined Games Workshop in 1993 at the tender age of 19 as an assistant games developer. After talking to Jervis Johnson at the Games Day event, I'd written some Blood Bowl rules, and he said he quite liked them. And asked that I send them to him at the design studio, rather than him, if he took them on the day, he'd lose them, which I understand, having done several games days now. Clear up is quite hectic. So I put in a cover letter with those rules and sent them to Jervis, and the cover letter basically said, I'd love to have a job at the design studio. If you need anyone to empty the bins, that's fine.
I love that.
And sorry, I've got an alarm going off. And then I was fortunate enough that they were hiring assistant games developers at that time. There were 3 positions, and for various reasons, although I hadn't applied for that job specifically, because I'd looked at the advert in White Dwarf and I thought I was underqualified, they had me up for an interview. They liked what they saw and they offered me a job. And then I was at Games Workshop for 14 years. So yeah, I worked in assistant games developer. My very first job was literally pasting up printouts of the war gear cards from Dark Millennium onto playing cards so they could use them for playtesting. So the description. So yeah, exactly. So second edition 40k had just come out, and we were still just finishing off testing Dark Millennium. And all the psychic powers and war gear and stuff like that. So yeah, my very first Monday in the studio, Andy Chambers gave me a bunch of printouts and a pair of scissors and some glue and said stick those onto those, which was a hell of an introduction, and possibly quite relevant to your viewers as well. It was the same day that I walked to the tea room and got to say hello to Jez Goodwin, which was just, and I then went and stood outside as an Eldar fan myself. I went and stood outside and just quietly vibrated for the next 20 minutes until I could come back and think again, which was crazy. Those first couple of weeks were just, it's not just it's kind of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory and the candy store and everything else, and you pinch yourself constantly. For a while until you get used to it, and then you never quite get used to it sometimes either. Particularly again with people like Jez or Andy.
Oh yeah.
Similar position, they were names. I mean, Andy's only a few years older than me, and now that we're older, it doesn't make quite so much difference. But back then,
when you're 19, yeah.
He'd been in White Dwarf, like say, for 2 or 3 years. Prior to that, in my most influential teens, and gaming and stuff. So yeah, and then from there to White Dwarf, like say, I was production and a staff writer on White Dwarf, doing photography and layouts and battle reports and writing articles and things. And from there, bounced back to games development, where I was on the 40k team. Mainly worked on 40k. First codex was Sisters of Battle Codex. Then there was lots of moving around and stuff, and I ended up being a Warhammer lore master. Which meant I was in charge of the Warhammer Fantasy team. Just after Thomas Pirinen and Rick had designed 6th edition Warhammer, I took over that, which was like been in charge of the games development team, but also like liaising with the artists and miniature designers and Project E stuff, and making it all cool and what's going to go on the release schedule. So I did that for several years, and then there was a brief period where I was lead background designer, lead something like that. and we divided the jobs up differently, and I was in charge of like the narrative and the lore and all the rest of it across both Warhammer and 40k.
Wow.
And Alessio was in charge of the rules, and then I can't remember who was. I think Jez was lead miniatures design, something like that. That they changed it again. I went back into games development as a senior designer, which was for the last couple of years that I was there, which was sort of doing Dark Elves and Vampire Counts for 7th edition Warhammer. But it's when I sort of tag teamed with Alessio doing Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Demons for 40k, and then that was it really. And then I parted company with the design studio in 2008, 7, one of those, 2008 I think, which now means I've actually been out of the design studio longer than I was there. However, on the other side of things, in 1997 or whenever it was when Games Workshop launched Black Library, I was in the fortunate position to be two or three desks down from one of the people who was launching it, Andy Jones, who I'd written obviously some what we call colour text, some bits of fiction and things for stuff, and so he said, was I interested in writing a short story for they launched with a bi-monthly magazine called Inferno, which is a mixture of short stories, comics, little cutaways and stuff like that. So I had to go writing a short story for that. Got lots of red pen on it back from Mark Gascoigne, and learnt very quickly how to write better in terms of prose. One of the characters I created for that was Lieutenant, however you want to pronounce it, Cage of the Last Chances.
You can definitely have your lieutenant. We're dead.
Yeah, will be Lieutenant Cage, and Colonel Schaefer of the Last Chances. So when Black Library were looking to start their novel range, they took characters like Cage and Gaunt, and obviously got Trek and Felix and stuff from Warhammer, and made the first novels based on those. So that's how I got into writing novels, basically.
Wow.
And then I've now done 45 or so novels, I think. And then numerous short stories, and I've got an original fantasy trilogy that was released with Angry Robot, and blah blah blah. Yeah, lots of stuff. So, but all from that conversation with Jervis Johnson at Games Day, and saying, "Oh, do you like this?" and taking that opportunity, I suppose, of just putting myself out there, and then hopefully doing a good enough job at least that they never got rid of me.
Yeah, no, that makes it's like, on the one hand you're obviously hugely talented. On the other hand, it sounds like you must have really pleased some supernatural creature when you were like 17, because that is a lot of really delightful turns of fate. It's the lore master thing is really cool too. I mean, wow.
Yeah, I mean that was great. I mean, I think that was probably the high point. That was just after I'd designed and sort of like helmed the Inquisitor game,
right?
Which was probably my favourite project at Games Workshop.
Oh, nice.
To work on, because I never got my one regret, I suppose, is that when I was working on 40k, and it was 3rd edition 40k, and we were only doing the really small codexes, so I only had like a 48-page Eldar Codex to write or something, so I didn't get to really go to town on an Eldar Codex while I was there, a nice big 96-page job, which is what I would have liked to have done. Phil Kelly,
sure,
who's another big Eldar fan and who kind of inherited my Eldar boots, got to do one, and I'm very jealous. He got to really go to town on that.
It's interesting you say that. So that was the one thing, because one of my patrons specifically said that what he liked about your 3rd edition codex was how much of the lore was diegetic. It's just worked into like the relic descriptions and these like unreliable narrator quotations here and there. And these days, codexes come with pages and pages devoted to lore, and he kind of misses that earlier type of writing that you were doing with more restrictions, right?
Yeah, I mean, we learned really quick how to get a lot of information through in a quite small space, and also just what's really essential for people to know. Sure. I think that somewhere in between is a good spot. I think like the 2nd edition style codexes, which were just like very word of God with a few quotes, and obviously the pictures and stuff are all part of it. There was a lot of, that kind of was the foundation of those armies for most people, and just some of that basic information is just really good. But actually, the in-universe stuff, the flavour of it, a combination of that, which becomes really evocative, I think, and actually, can conjure a lot of ideas and imagery in a short space of time, I think is important. I think for me, what the background needs to do is take people to the point of battle, and then they fight the battle on the tabletop. I don't necessarily feel the need to describe lots and lots of battles and things that, we've done sort of like great battles, and there's obviously the history of the races and different factions and things are filled with war, but that's kind of the tabletop side of it.
Sure.
We don't People know what that bit's like because they're playing. That's where they get to take over the story.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think it's more about giving people the inspiration that goes into that. So you have text which it's like they can imagine what the battle's like and what's going on as they're pushing these miniatures around and things, but actually you don't need to endlessly describe the ins and outs of things moving around and attacking each other and how that works,
Right.
because that so, and I think there's just I think there's a nice blend, and I think we kind of got there. For myself, obviously, I worked on them, but like in 7th edition Warhammer, which was kind of like 4th edition 40k, the books were a bit longer, but they weren't massive. I think and you can't be too formulaic about some things.
Right.
It's really hard to write an entire page of text about the Rhino transport, because it's just not that interesting.
Yeah.
So what you do is you say, well, we don't have to have a page on everything, like I say, because it just becomes pointless and filler. But what you want to do is just like say, get an idea into people's minds, and actually a cool piece of text of like Space Marines coming out of a Rhino and into battle tells you more about it than any amount of words just trying to describe how it fits into their formation and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think, and certainly with Inquisitor, we took along that idea of getting across the background through not just like pages and pages of information. Because if you look back at Rogue Trader, I mean, there's quite a bit of background in there, but it's nowhere near as much as there used to be later. But it's so evocative,
Right.
but just because of the style of it and what is said and everything else, I mean, like lots of it's just like, oh, look at this D1000 table, D100 table,
Right.
but that D100 table is actually part of the lore. It tells you what these guys have got. It all works together. So, yeah, it definitely works smart rather than just. And again, the expectation of people to try and absorb all that information. Like here's 60 pages of lore that you have to think. Some people feel they need to understand. You go, well, it's not. Here's the basics. Here's what it can obscure what you're trying to say because you've got too much stuff. Whereas, like say, a nice single page of something that really gets home a point that may do a better job than endless pages, kind of like reiterating it again and again.
Yeah, and I think in the more recent codexes, the lore sections are often, if not word for word, very very nearly. Can we jump into lore? Do you mind?
Yeah.
So it seems to me that with reference to Eldar lore, they're kind of like 4 periods, right? There's like the Dawn Age following the creation of the Eldar by the Old Ones, the period of time that gives rise to myths and legends. Then there's like the old Eldari Empire, which you once suggested in a Q&A should be probably more properly called the Dominion, because they didn't have...
That's my preferred term. Yes.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'd love to wreck on that. And then there's the Fall, which is like a briefer period, but full of action. And then kind of like the last 10,000 years status quo. Could you maybe touch on what you find most interesting about each of those periods as an author?
Yeah. For me, and particularly when I was doing some of the Aeldari stuff, because that really gets into like, where do Eldar come from and how do their souls work, and very lots of warpiness, and what does it mean to be, what actually does it mean to have reincarnating spirits and all that kind of stuff, without necessarily getting too much into nuts and bolts of it, but just I like getting into the metaphysics of 40k.
Sure.
And the Eldar in particular have got lots of lovely metaphysics to play with, being very psychic and all the rest of it. So, and the idea of, because they're old, really old, Necron old, nearly old, old one old. But actually, the way the Eldar view it and the way it's happened is like those millions of years is all just cyclic. Again, it's like there's little riffs on kind of again certainly sort of like Buddhism or Hinduism or certain other belief structures of like these big cosmic cycles and things. And so that's how, and I liked playing around with that and the idea where and some of it comes about from actual contradictions and things. So people. It seemed to be like there wasn't really a consistency about what people meant when we talked about the war in heaven, particularly after Necrons were introduced.
Yeah.
So the war in heaven was this big mythical thing that existed in their lore before Necrons. But then when the Necron background was developed, it was decided, or maybe that was the war in heaven and elements of it. And actually, for my part, it's like they're all true. And actually, for example, if the Eldar managed to survive for another, 20,000 years or whatever, the period right now with the Galactic Rift and stuff would be another war in heaven.
Right.
Yeah. It'd be everything gets reinterpreted. So all those events, because everything that was is again, and the only difference being now is those souls aren't reincarnating and living those experiences again and again and again.
Right.
So although there's a vast Eldar history before the fall and the sort of like, and then into the rise of the Dominions. Most of it is the same thing happening again and again, and ebbs and flows of Eldar civilization. One, just because it kind of ties in, like I say, with the way they look at things, the psychedelic stuff. But two, it explains how they've not, how they're still relatively mortal and normal, and as much as they're alien and stuff, they've not got completely like sublimated into like just pure consciousness or whatever. It's like because they are tied to this physicality and this cyclic nature of the universe and stuff. So that's really cool. And I love the Dominions into the Fall. Again, the Fall obviously is a lovely area just to play around with because there's not a lot about it. And again, I like what I really got into the Fall, as it were, when we started doing the Dark Eldar, doing the Drukhari, because again, the idea being is like, well, these are kind of like what they were before the Fall. They've just not bothered changing. They've just continued as they were, and so these guys are examples of the cults and the sects that were around, and that kind of like preying on each other and stuff like that. It's just like, that's just what the Aeldari were like. They were all like this.
But they're still living that rock and roll lifestyle,
Yeah, absolutely. Live fast, live long. Oh, hang on, we get the best of both worlds. So that really spurred lots of thoughts of what was Eldar society like at the Fall, and I got to poke at that a little bit, doing a couple of the Phoenix Lords novels and around that time, again, without necessarily trying to explain everything too much, but just exploring some of the consequences of what's already been written in the background. That's what I find interesting, is like not necessarily inventing stuff, although there's lots of stuff to invent, but actually going, well, if these exist and these exist, like, well, finding the first spirit stones, how did this come about? How did these societies evolve? How did the Craftworlds become the Craftworlds? How did the Drukhari become Drukhari? And in particular, again, I've played around in the Phoenix Lords, but also in other places, like, what are all those other particularly, again, post-Fall, we know about the Exodites, we know about Harlequins, we know about Drukhari, we know about the Craftwelders. But you go, well, what were those other little attempts to try and survive Slanesh that didn't succeed?
Right.
All these other weird little psychic little enclaves, and some would have just gone to chaos. We know that there are Chaos Eldar, but what were they? How were they around at that time and stuff? They're not Dark Eldar, they're something else. So I love, like, the background raises lots of interesting questions which can never be definitively answered. They just like, there's loads of cool, inspiring things that may or may not have happened, and let's have a look at them.
Can we just stick with Chaos Eldar for a moment? Because I remember the second Ed Codex making references to them, and then they sort of fell out of the lore, and I'm kind of delighted to hear you refer to them as a thing that definitely exists and is out there, because it's always seemed to me that they should be. Do you think we'll ever see those incorporated back into the contemporary game in any way?
I'd be surprised. I mean, it's not something that really was talked about as a faction.
Right.
Anytime I was there, it would be more interesting. I mean, and again, the development of 40k has gone a particular way where we have quite large, like monolithic approaches to the factions and stuff.
Yeah.
In terms of like, here's a Chaos army, this is a Chaos Space Marine army, this is a Chaos Demon army, this is an Eldar army. Whereas the reality obviously is a lot more mixed. And so if we had something which was more like the old Realm of Chaos book with a more mixed Chaos Warband
Right.
approach
Yeah.
to stuff, that would be a cool. I mean, Kill Team or Blackstone Fortress and stuff. Again, some of these more. So I don't think you'd ever see an army of Chaos Eldar. But actually, with one of the sort of like the for want of a better term, the secondary games or the other 40k set games that aren't the battle game, which explore different parts of the background, I could see potentially a band of Chaos Eldar, or a character who comes from that background, in the same way that we have an Iron Man and we have a
Sure.
things like that. So you don't have to commit. It's the same way. It's like writing a short story. It's like you can quickly explore an idea, but you don't have to have the entire weight of a novel. It's the same deal. So you don't actually have the entire weight of a whole army about this thing. It's like you just admit that it exists, and here's a cool
Right.
teaser of what they might be like.
Yeah, and it's a great conversion opportunity for players too. I think a lot of Eldar players perversely also have Emperor's Children, and you could always have
Yeah.
Chaos Cultists, right? That are I have a few, just thrown in there, converted Eldar models. It's one of the great things
Yeah.
about the hobby. But I got you off track. We were talking the big span of history and Eldar lore and aspects of those big four periods that you find especially interesting as a writer.
Yes, funny you should say aspects there, because the other bit, of course, is, and I find so post fall and the Craftworlds in particular, I think is the most interesting bit for me, because and so you've got the Eldar, and they like I say, you're essentially living the Drukhari life in many ways, and then a bunch of them decide after that they don't really like that and they're a bit scared, and they run away on the Craftworlds and stuff, and eventually they meet Ashimen, who teaches them how to compartmentalize their emotions, how to control this raging psyche that they possess, and essentially sort of voluntarily break their psyche apart into all these little bits that they can then examine and deal with. And for me, and of course that came about from Aspect Warriors, which is this very, again, tabletop obvious thing of like, well, these ones are the fire ones and these ones are the, and it's a nice it's just a nice way of organising an army that's slightly different to the way Space Marines are organised or the way Imperial Guard are organised. And again, Jez coming up with lovely visual elements for each of them, and they feel like they're based in mythology and stuff. But for me as a writer, then I love digging down into all of my books come down to, in some regard, a lot about identity and things. And so the Eldar who literally reinvent themselves every now and again as a person, as an individual. It's like, I am Fire Dragon Gav, then I'm going to be Cleaner Gav, and then I'm going to be Seer Gav, and then I'm going to be, or actually I quite like being a Seer, or chapters of Seer, or whatever it might be, and being completely different individuals as they change and as they develop and as they grow as people. I find that fascinating to explore. And then once I start digging down into that, again, it's like, well, how and why does an individual go on any particular path, and when? And particularly, how does that apply to the Aspect Warriors? So when I did the Path of the Eldar, that was very much my one of the things I wanted to tackle really was that why would you decide you want to become a Striking Scorpion, or why would you suddenly decide you want to be a Dark Reaper or something like that? And the idea that it's bottom up, so actually there's a psychological need that is bursting out, that isn't being addressed in a case of the Path of the Warrior. He's feelings of anger and jealousy because of the sort of love triangle thing that's going on, and feeling rejected and stuff. So so he can no longer control his anger. So the way you control your anger and your warlike tendencies, and the inherent violence of being an Eldar, who you can turn your hate up to 11,
right?
Because that's how that's how their emotions work. The way you do that is you go and learn to channel it and to contain it within a war mask and so on. And so once you start thinking like that, you think, well, rather than thinking about, well, what are the troop types and stuff, you go, well, what are the psychological drivers that would lead to different paths?
Yeah. And
what would they be? So which way you go, well, there's bound to be a path. Again, I don't know exact details of how they work and things, but, just thinking about the life stages of most people and what they end up to to deal with,
Right.
of like like grief and parenthood and all these other things that we learn and experience actually are paths for the elder. They have to it's like, oh, actually I'm feeling a bit broody. I'm going to go on the path of parenthood, and become a parent and learn all about that and dealing with a child and whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm done with that.
Speaking
now.
to my heart here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, So you have young kids now. It's like, and then it's like, well, they've grown up. I can switch that off,
Right.
or at least, or that's been added to my experience now. The path of mourning was one I thought was quite good for grieving.
Yeah.
And because again, that came about from this old idea that you used to, you used to have professional mourners.
Right.
All the way back down into like classical times and stuff like that. Who would mourn for people and stuff. So actually, because again, grief is so extreme for the Eldar. So actually, most of them can't necessarily feel it. So actually, to have somebody to grieve on your behalf, or and weep and whatever it might be. And again, with the path of the warrior, again, I wanted to carry. It's like they're all into, they're into poetry and sculpture and things like that. And you go, well, again, that creative need. What's being exercised there? And then I talked about the path, and there's the temptation of the path of dreaming. Of just like staring out the window for 1,000 years.
Yeah, I really liked that in the Path books. The whole notion of the path of the dreamer. It's really cool.
Yeah, and those things, and so how do you become a balanced individual by addressing these things, and then becoming trapped in them? Because again, that's the other bit that's inherent in the path. And again, we have these examples of the exarchs of like because basically squad leaders, but actually this idea that become so enamoured of that part of the path that they can never step off it, and again reminding people that the exarchs and the similar ones on other paths are both. They're a necessary evil.
Yeah.
They're lost to the path. They failed. They're failures as Craftworld Eldar because they've got stuck.
Right.
They've become so enamoured of their violent tendencies that they can't get away from them. But on the other hand, you need exarchs to train other warriors and allow every warrior they train exercises slightly their trappedness, as it were. It's like they need to be trapped so that others aren't.
Yeah.
And then occasionally they become, it's like, again, it's a very, the path of the warrior has a very accelerated process because I wanted him to become an exarch because I wanted to show that whole journey. But so he becomes trapped quite quickly, and that's, usually it should be like, it should at least take a few hundred years, but and a few more battles than he has. But but that experience wanted to be the same of like, actually I'm so comfortable, doing this, just dreaming or just making poetry or whatever, and I don't want to actually deal with the rest of my life and become again trapped in that particular part of their lives, the lure of it being there constantly, but at the same time they're the ones that create the greatest works. Farseers are trapped, again,
Right.
they don't or at least because we don't necessarily talk about whatever, so once you're on the path of a seer, how does that work? Can you jump on and off? Warlocks, there are seers who aren't warlocks because they've not been warriors before, because that was that was again
Right.
part of the original warlock background was and then later on we created the idea of the autarch of like actually being able to have stepped from the difference. Being commander isn't the same as being a warrior. So actually having stepped on, having that empathy and that awareness of the different aspects enough because you've passed through several of them. So yeah, I find that fascinating, and the fact that each of these times these individuals are essentially becoming new people. Even they might have certain core aspects of their personality, but they're adding something to themselves or shutting off something from themselves as they move along this path, which makes great. A core of writing stories and stuff is this idea of character development. You go, literally this character, you can see them.
Right.
These guys are actually allowed to make big changes in their character in a way that maybe humans don't really.
A little bit as teenagers, right? It's sort of blown up to this incredibly hyperbolic level with space elves.
Absolutely.
We all remember a little bit from having been 14, but wow. So we're brushing up against...
Well, you say that because that's why I say when people say what are Eldar, I say Eldar are all teenagers.
Yes.
Because being a teenager and you're so into everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To the exclusion of everything else for a little while.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That band's the best band, and I'm going to be really into
Right.
music and what I'm wearing, and oh no, my God, that's the worst thing ever, and I hate my life, and whatever else it might be, and oh, that's the best thing. Oh, this girl likes me, or hey, I'm on those hormones,
Yes.
and whatever they do to you, that's Eldar all the time.
One of the things that I find really fascinating about the concept of paths, and this too is my favorite thing about Craftworlders, is that interaction between their innate psychic ability, the whole notion of paths, and then their emotional intensity, such that I kind of imagine that while you're on a particular path, it would always be everything that you see in the world would be understood through the lens of the metaphor of that path. So like, if you're a weaver, I have a story about this. If you're a weaver, everything that you encounter, you make sense of to yourself through the metaphor of weaving. And if you are, a gardener, it would be the same thing. And I love that, the opportunity for sort of visual metaphor and poetry and just this very aesthetic way of encountering the world is so cool. And I think you've dug down on that better than any of the other Black Library authors. Partially, you're the only one who really has done a lot of Eldar stories, right? I mean, there's been some other people, but you're the guy.
Yeah, I pushed to do it basically because there were no Xenos stories at all or whatever, and obviously a big fan of the Eldar, and it's just like, it was seen as a bit of a gamble at the time. Really, it's like, well, is anyone going to buy these? Are Eldar that popular? And luckily they were a success. And because I knew I had the room to write a trilogy, and I knew exactly how, I kind of had it mapped out. Like it's like a warrior, seer, and then the outcast. It was already there from the outset and things, so I could play around with it. And the idea of the three different perspectives around the same event, because Eldar are all about threes and trinities and all that kind of stuff as well. So it was really, really nice to be able to be allowed to go into that with that being my aim. And I think over the years, sort of like the remit of the Black Library's changed slightly, and wouldn't necessarily write that kind of fiction now.
Right.
I think, well, not necessarily allowed, I don't know, but it's just, I was given, because of it was me as much as anything, I was given some leeway to delve into those areas and to create and to expand the setting and lore into those areas, because they trusted me to do it properly, if you see what I mean. And again, it's not necessarily they don't trust other authors to do it, but it's an unknown quantity. So I always push my luck in terms of what I chose to write about, because I could leverage that experience and the position of being within the design studio.
That makes sense.
No, I literally know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Therefore, let me do this, and it's going to be okay. And in half the cases, I'm the person people are asking to answer these questions already. So So there's been lots of things I've written for Black Library that just on the basis of being allowed to when others wouldn't, and I think.
Sure.
But I think Andy Chambers followed up nicely with they disliked the format, so they called it the Path of the Dark Eldar, even though they don't have a path at all.
Right.
But, he had his own particular take and insight into the Drukhari and stuff like that. But for the Craftworlds, Guy Haley's done some nice novels, but again, they were sort of like there wasn't a consistent trilogy or series or anything like that.
Yeah.
Again, I've tried a couple of things. The Phoenix Lords and the Aeldari both, got a couple of books, but they just didn't sell as well.
Which is a shame. It's a shame. The Phoenix Lord stories are my favorite thing that you've done. I was really bummed that we didn't get more of those.
I keep poking away. I might come back to them. It's part of that problem of writing in like a universe of the tabletop game, which is, especially these days, the success of novels, as much based on what's just big in the meta of the game.
Yeah.
And Eldar just haven't really had that much support for a while, and all the rest of it. They had the Aeldari, but then that kind of fizzled out a bit. And again, so I got to write 2 out of the 3 books I wanted for that, and and various other things. And so there's a couple of incomplete projects, and I think the Eldar. Generally, it's also just a bit of an embarrassment of riches in some ways. In that, for the longest time, because Jezzy's models were so good, they survived when others would not, and things like that. So at some point, they'll get a whole bunch of new stuff. I'm sure they'll have nice, lovely, new, amazing plastics and all the rest of it. They've had bits and pieces, and they'll become.
Don't tease me, Gav.
Well, I hope so. Again, just like as an aside, but the difficulty. One of the difficulties with the Eldar in particular is those aspect warriors.
Sure.
In that the general rule for a plastic set in 40k or Age of Sigmar or whatever is that it has to be multi-use.
Yeah.
So you can do a couple of different types of squads out of it, which of course is completely the opposite of what the aspect warriors are.
Right.
They're mono, and so
Interesting.
there's a square to circle there, or
Right.
circle to square, whichever way. It's like, well, you can put some you can put in some. Exarch options and things like that. With the Dire Avengers, I think actually they ended up with a kind of almost felt like a completely different aspect. Was kind of put in there as an adjunct with more of a Guardian type vibe to it. So that's a difficulty. I don't know how that gets overcome. I don't have a solution for whether it's easier like where you go. Actually, they'll just be popular enough that they can't be
Yeah, that's
they can't be multi.
fascinating.
Or well, I don't know, because you just and again, I know Jez is very keen on in many ways. Like you can't dilute that idea of that ritual armor and weaponry and stuff.
Right.
Like I said, the Exarchs you get away with it, but it's like, okay, well, my Banshees don't have power swords; they have something else.
Banshee blades,
they're not Banshees anymore. But maybe you can get away with it. Maybe that's too tight a definition. I don't know. But that's one of the reasons. It's one of the difficulties of it. And again, so without that, there's less trickle down, as it were, into people that want to pick up Eldar novels, and therefore there's just the as much as I think they're probably as good, if not probably better novels. My Phoenix Lords and Inari stuff are probably I've learned a lot about storytelling and things since I did the Path of the Eldar.
Sure. Yeah.
The Path of the Eldar sold far more books than those that did.
Right.
Even though, comparing size of 40k now compared to the size of 40k then. But yeah, I mean it'll have its time. I remain hopeful at some point.
Yeah. No, I hope
to.
so too. Yeah. No, and it's interesting to hear about the economic considerations too. I think we've all wondered for years why we haven't been getting the plastic aspects. I wonder if there's a way you could do it with like just helmets and weapons. I don't know. They'll figure something out. Yeah.
There could be. It will be get done at some point.
So you were talking about how in your writing you don't necessarily do. It sounded like you were alluding to some sort of formula that Black Library has moved towards, and this notion that you're violating it. And I don't know if I'm making a correct inference here, but my favorite thing about the writing that you've done, and I want to be clear, I think you write action scenes very, very well. I think you are great at that. But it's not your action writing, and it's not the character development. I love your world building. I'm crazy about your world building, and the way that you dig down on the everyday lives of the Eldar and sort of imagine into being answers to questions. You do this a little bit on your website too. If listeners haven't been over to Gav's website, he has a treasure trove of writing advice and Q&A interviews in which he's very forthcoming about Eldar lore. It's just a great resource. But you're really good about thinking about what it would be like to live in a society where everybody's a little bit psychic, or how could you have a path of the merchant in a post-scarcity society? What aspects of the lives of Craftworlders have you not been able to dig down on that you would really like to explore and develop for the IP?
I think there's some really interesting stuff about family and how family dynamics work, and how there's a very typical thing that you do, particularly with fantasy and science fiction writing, where protagonists and things end up with no family. They don't have mothers and fathers because they're complicated.
Right. Yeah.
And some of the best fiction does have those in. That's the thing. And there's nods to it. There's a whole thing with Theriana and her father in Path of Sierra, and that's a whole. That's the point of that. But actually, exploring family dynamics and relationships in that way, when people constantly change, is something I would like to do. I think there's and how that interacts with like raising children. Now that, because again I have a 9-year-old son now, so again, sure. I wasn't a dad when I wrote Path of the Eldar. I wasn't a dad. Now that I'm a dad, although you know this now, those things that you start to think about, and it's a different experience. There's nothing like it else that you've ever done in your life to being a parent. So it starts to influence work, and so it makes me think a bit differently about how the Eldar would interact with their children and stuff. Again, I had a mother and child in Ashumen, Hand of Assyrian,
Right.
which again was a part of time army. And again, that was interesting about how that early years development works. How something that's born as a psychic entity with powers, but also connected to Slanesh, and how do they protect that child?
Yeah.
And actually, they effectively have to stunt that child's psychic growth until it's old and matured enough to then be able to actually develop the things. I see. In the same way that some kids, some parents would like, they could just give our kids a pacifier to keep them quiet, wherever it's like there's the rune. Your kids get too psychic, so it's like, quick, give them the rune.
Yeah.
Siphon off some of the psychic energy or something like that. Until they learn to control it, because it's a serious danger.
Right.
This is like Imperium purging Psychers kind of danger, but also the psychic connection and that bond. Like I say, I touched on it a bit, but the more I think about it, the more I think I'd like to do. There's more I'd like to do with the whole culture based around this psychic interaction and the Infinity Circuit, and it's always that kind of fun thing. It's like, how do Star Trek doors know when to open and when not to open?
Yeah.
Right, because they do. But it's like, well, actually, Eldar doors do.
Yeah, they know. They literally know when to open. Yeah,
because they just pick up on
because they're people. The doors are made of people. Yes. Yeah.
Doors are made.
So let me ask a question about this, because I think it's such a good idea. So this is one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, is the challenge of writing Eldar such that they are interesting and accessible to human beings, but they still seem sufficiently alien. And so here's the thing you've just brushed on, which I think is really cool, and that is that in our culture, its parents kind of expect and are accustomed to their children going through phases and being very, very different from earlier versions of themselves. But it would be traumatic for a child, right, if your parent, and this happens to some people in the real world, suddenly became very, very different. But Eldar society would be based around the notion that this would happen. You would be expecting it to happen. At some point, your parents would change paths. And what does it do to family dynamics when you are all, not just mercurial teenagers, becoming such different iterations of yourselves, potentially over a very, very long time, because Eldar are very long-lived. Is that the sort of complexity you have in mind when you talk about digging down on familial relationships?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, because it's and again, and also just like the organisational logistics of it almost. So again, in Wild Rider, again we have there's the Wild Rider clans and things. So they have this more dynastic sort of arrangement of their families and stuff, and families much more important, say, than it is on a Lightok. Lightok is obviously not that big on families. So again, you get the Firehearts are a different. There's a lot more family relationships in that story than there are in Path of the Warrior.
Sure.
But again, that's modelled on the old kind of like noble houses that existed before the fall. So what other models can we use? Is there a collective raising? Is it it takes a Craftworld to raise a child?
Yeah, that's cool.
In which actually the path of nurturing, so the path of parenthood and the path of nurturing aren't necessarily the same thing. One's the need to reproduce your genes and take that to term and do whatever. Yeah. Another is raising a child, and maybe they don't even follow.
Yeah.
But this child becomes your child. Your child, it's like the idea of adoption or fostering and all that kind of stuff can become blurred. And also, again, I'm very underqualified to do a lot of stuff on gender roles and things like that. But again, the Eldar are one of those where you absolutely got to think there's like their grasp of technology and body manipulation and gender has to be different to ours.
Of course, yeah.
In some ways, there's no reason why, in terms of, and again, if people are raising stuff as a group, again, is it really a case of mother and father, or is it just parent? Is it just
great point.
How do those sorts of things, without even necessarily worrying about any kind of. But getting that right, it's kind of, again, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Yeah. So, again, I touched on this in certain areas, in bits of the background, where, again, we talked about the idea of the Howling Banshees being this female aspect. So when you're a Howling Banshee, regardless of whatever biological components you have, it's like when you take on the aspect of the Banshee and put on that war mask, you are the Banshee, and you're considered by other Eldar as female.
Yeah.
Which, of course, has issues in itself because then it just predicates all the others are male because that's the only one that's been said as female or agender or whatever. But again, so you go, it starts getting very murky because of course it was just invented as we went along, and these ones were sculpted this particular way and were said were female, and actually interpreting that later on become, it's like, well, actually shouldn't half of these all be like, are warp spiders female? Well, actually we don't know. And in fact, warp spiders probably shouldn't be anything because they're based on these little, crystal symbiotes that just exist in the psychic network. So again, they shouldn't. When you take on the personality of a warp spider, when you are as a warp spider and the war mask on, you should be thinking like that.
Right.
Like the Dark Reapers, with their their dark sense of humour and their morbidity and stuff like that. So parenthood and children, again, that same sort of thing. It's like, well, what's it? The person that biologically produced you isn't necessarily, like you say, the same person in many different ways, and it might not be the person that raised you.
Right.
That might be something, unless it's important that it is. Like say in the case of like a dynastic system, like the Wild Rider clans have, and then because there's also the notions of. It's very different. Which is why I liked much of 40k because the Imperium, because it's so medieval. It's medieval, so it's that idea of, while your dad was a scribe, your granddad was a scribe, your great granddad was a scribe. Learn a trade. That's Whereas the Eldar, like I say, even the idea of learning a trade to make a living doesn't exist.
Right.
So how that all boils down into family relationships and childcare and things, but at the same time bearing in mind this is a 40k story, so that somewhere somebody has to be shooting at somebody,
right.
and that's the important thing to remember, is as much as we explore all of these things, they can become too domestic. They still need to link back to that big picture. It's not that every scene has to be an action scene, and I think that's a mistake, and that's certainly not what I write. But stuff still has to have its core. There's still, part of the warrior is still about the warrior. That's why it's there. Raising the family relationship in Ashumen is all about, they're on this crashed battleship. It's again the relationship's explored in the context of the 40k universe, which is at war. For interesting things, an Eldar is an Eldar who sees that the child become an aspect warrior. What does that feel like, knowing they're going to go off and they're going to fight and possibly die and stuff? Does it mean it that much to them? What's that? What are the consequences of that?
Yeah.
So again, it's not necessarily the heart of the story, but it should be part of a story.
Yeah, I want to push back on this just a little bit, because I've heard other Black Library authors say this. I talked to a former editor at Black Library once who made the same point. It's clearly like, but I think at least just in terms of my thinking about the 40k stories that I have enjoyed the most, and the novels that I've gotten the most out of, in your novels, I love the world building. That's the action scene at the beginning of the Path stories is, I think, one of the best Eldar action scenes that anybody's written ever. But it is the world building. And then I don't know if you've read, you can't possibly read all of them, it would be impossible. But have you read the Magos collection?
No.
Okay, it's there's this lengthy story that develops between like this essentially scientist and a cop, which is this really fascinating romance. I love The Last Church. Do you know that short story? I think it's Graham McNeil.
Yes.
Yeah. It's fabulous. It's two people stay up all night drinking and talking. And I think that in many ways, in the same way that Star Wars has in the name wars, the best bits of Andor are not necessarily the action scenes. That what you're doing when you do all of that world building is you're providing this context such that when we're playing the tabletop game, the battles seem to mean something. But I feel like maybe the tabletop game is where all the fighting really needs to happen, and maybe every story doesn't have to be this percentage combat.
And absolutely, I think, and there are the fads and guidelines and policies that change over the time. I've been Black Library 22 years now, whatever, 23 years, writing for them since first published, sort of thing, and different opinions have held sway, and I think what's important, what's most important, is that the action, like I say, is still part of the narrative.
Okay. Yeah.
And you get the same sort of
Sure.
thing with action films and things of like, no, you don't stop the story and then have an action
Right.
sequence, which is Michael Bay. You know, uh, it's like it should be woven
Yeah.
into
It's got to be part
the
of the
fact
story.
that the
Yeah.
conflict becomes physical is woven into the nature of the story.
We have to keep
And
learning
you
things
learn-
about
and
the
you can-
characters. Yeah.
You continue to learn things about the character and the world through those action sequences, and of course that can become hard if you've got an editor saying, "Oh, we need to have more people getting punched in the face,"
Right.
Because you just, and even as an author, we do it sometimes. Like I've literally left a note of like, insert battle here.
Yeah. I like
And
that.
come back to it later. But the thing is, it's telling you something like, you go, well, does we really need a battle there? And you're right. I don't think necessarily. And again, we shouldn't mistake action for drama, because again, a lot of action is not dramatic.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with like Space Marines or main characters or whatever, because you don't. The physical challenge against them, the will they, again.
There's no
as
true
much as
threat.
there's- Yeah, exactly. As much as there's suspension of disbelief, nobody really thinks they're going to die.
Right.
Apart from a couple of novels potentially. This isn't Game of Thrones with so many multiple characters you can just mow them down.
Right.
Like single character perspective novels in particular. So it has to be dramatic. It has to, and actually, like, as you say, the story is what, for me, stories are what threaten the character's worldview, what threatens their understanding of their place and who they are. It's not, because again, there's no character development once you're dead.
Right.
You can't
Right.
learn from being dead. Other people might affect people, can affect the reader in some ways, and as a capstone, as a moment of sacrifice, as a thing or whatever. I think it's death of characters and stuff is part of something, but actually. I was thinking about this earlier actually. For whatever faults and stuff you may have on other things and stuff, one of the things Joss Whedon was very good at in Buffy, for example, was like just putting characters through the ringer constantly.
Yeah.
And conflict, and and just turning it up and things like that. And it's why I found, it's like and wouldn't just kill off a character, but it's like just make them miserable and forever conflicted and stuff like that. And because that's what writers should be doing to
Right.
their characters. If you kill them off, actually you're letting them off. There's a 10 Commandments or something. I can't remember who it's from now. Raymond Chandler, and one of them is that thou shalt not give your character an even break.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like it's always the next, because that's how there's a theory that essentially stories are basically dry runs for us. That through stories we learn how to overcome things ourselves, because we empathise with the characters and put ourselves in a position, and we may act differently, but we learn from them. So they make mistakes of grieving or anger or whatever, and go, well, I wouldn't have flown off the handle and thrown them out. I would have done this.
Right.
And so we get to, there are simulations of life
Yes.
that we get to run again and again. And whether they're like moral tales from the past that teaching us like, don't do this, tiger will eat your face off or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes back to, we sort of didn't really get into that point of how do you create characters that humans resonate with, human reader resonates with, but don't feel too human. And that is really difficult, because I think the way you do that is the situations you put them in are still fairly human.
Right.
Their reactions, again, some of the criticisms for people for the Path of the Elder stuff was like, oh god, they're so sort of like over the top. It's like, it's because they're older. They're teenagers, it's like,
Right.
of course they overreact because that's what they do. They are extreme, but and you can't approach fiction with the expectation that the characters will react exactly the same way that you would.
Yeah.
They don't have all the information you do. They don't have the same biological makeup as you do. They don't have the same experiences, all that kind of stuff. So what they have to be is true to themselves and the setting that you've created. And then hopefully they feel understandable. So we set up that the Eldar are extreme, and they feel everything very deeply, and and stuff like that. And then when they do that, hopefully it feels natural. It doesn't feel human,
Right.
but actually you've become acclimatized to it. The most difficult bit I found actually was the physicality stuff of combat and things, because I so definitely wanted to make it from the Eldar point of view. So I didn't, there's no reference to and I didn't want to have to explain or even invent an entire like time system and measurement system and stuff like that. So I couldn't talk about like 10
thought about
meters
this
away
too.
or 3 seconds. It's like I don't. Yeah, exactly. Because you're just like I don't. There's a vague kind of like we talk about cycles and passes, and you get a vague idea of stuff over big time, but it's like it's very hard to convey how quick the Eldar are compared to the humans. So trying to just you can't describe the human. You're trying to describe the humans as kind of clumsy and clunky and stuff, but actually, what you're doing is that visually, like if this was an animation or a film or something, you'd be able to show it brilliantly.
Right.
With kind of like these guys are just kind of literally moving slower than the Eldar around them and stuff, but trying to convey some of those things in the action sequences of like particularly. Colandriel, as a scorpion, striker scorpions like that, basically killing humans before they realise they're under attack and stuff like that. And it's only as you piece it all together you realise that this is far. And you get a little bit of the Space Marines as well, but with the Eldar it's super exaggerated of just like, again, how do you describe things from their perspective? This, because you need to create this, the language, the framework that you're using to communicate stuff is completely different to ours. So you have to kind of build it up over time. So you end up, and I think the reader then becomes comfortable with it though, and then they feel more human anyway. Even though you've done all these things, they're in that headspace of the character, and then occupying, because they've not, again, because I didn't want to have any human eyes. Even when they're interacting with humans, you never really get to see the Eldar except as other Eldar see them, which was important for me. There was enough books about the Imperium. We didn't need another one that just happened to feature Eldar.
There are plenty of books about the Imperium that feature Eldar. I think so. You have the challenge that you're writing from the perspective of this alien race that fundamentally experiences the world in a different way. But then earlier when we were talking about parenting, you mentioned how parenting might be different on, say, Elatok than it is on Samhain. And I'm wondering about those sorts of cultural differences also, because in an interview with Shrine of Chaos, you explained that the original conception for the big 4 Space Marine chapters was that they exist on opposite ends of spectrums with reference to concepts of orthodoxy and purity. So Ultramarines are orthodox, Space Marines are unorthodox. Dark Angels are physically pure but spiritually corrupt. Blood Angels are physically corrupt and spiritually pure. So cool. Do you have any similar spectrum in mind for the various craft worlds?
No, not as such, I suppose. I think the craft worlds have evolved in a less kind of curated way, I suppose, in that individual bits of lore were kind of created that suggested, until I did the Craftworld Eldar, so like the mini codex that was supplement to Codex Eldar.
I've got that.
We never really codified it, and it wasn't necessarily even across all the craft worlds either. So, we had this idea of the Black Gardens of Allsway, and they had Eldad Allthran, and stuff, and it was, so therefore it was strongly suggested already in the lore that they were very, led by the Psykers, and like I said, they had this Black Guardians militia already there. Bill Tan, on the other hand, actually, until we kind of decided to, it had a name, Rebirth of Ancient Days, which was cool.
So cool.
But that was it. There wasn't anything before then, because they were just the green and white ones. So at that stage, I had conversations with Jez and Rick, and that's when we thought, well, that idea of them being this more crusadey, like, we're not accepting our fate, we're going to fight for it, but again, then drawing elements of stuff that was, say, for example, in Epic, the idea of the Swordwind, and different hosts, and the idea of a whole host of aspect warriors. So that we sort of fleshed them out at that stage. Obviously the Wild Riders were there already again, but they, thinking what does that mean in actual terms? They get a lot of this one troop type, as most of them.
Yeah.
They were a colour scheme, but trying to think culturally, then what does this mean? How does this affect them? What does it mean for the path? What does it mean for the way they interact with Psykers? Again, and the Ghost Warriors thing again was sort of grew up over time from the Doom of the Eldar game and the idea that they suffered these terrible losses recently and had to make more use of race constructs and things like that. So I think they've all evolved more out of the lore than as a set of conditions that were created from the um, they weren't, like the Space Wolves and the Blood Angels and stuff all existed, but then they were deliberately round about the second edition or whatever moved into those to represent those sort of positions. Whereas I think it's the cardinal points that the Eldar moved to are a bit different. It's like, well, they're the extra psychic ones. They're the extra jet bike ones. They're the extra aspect warrior ones. They're the extra ranger ones. Which sounds crude because it's there's like they came out of doing some variant army lists, but actually, hopefully, we made that feel more cultural. That actually that army list thing was more of a symptom of their culture.
Right. Yeah.
Or came out of their culture as the literal invention was that way round.
Sure.
The fact that it had, it's like, oh, okay, these guys. Again, of the Lightok, was strict, so therefore, actually, the stricter they are, the more of them pop out and become outcasts. What does that mean? So that that came about, and it's interesting now to try and remember that wasn't always the case. That around about 2000 or 1999 or whenever it was when we did the Eldar, we solidified, or I and the team, solidified some of those ideas into that. Codex,
right.
And before then, most of them were just colour schemes with a little bit of background.
Yeah.
But that's how these things start. That's how they evolve. It was weird. I was looking at Lexicanum the other day for something I can't remember, and there was a list of Craftworlds on there, and it was massive.
Yeah.
Of named Craftworlds, like Craftworld names have just been invented 10 to the dozen over the last 20 years, which I find really weird. And actually, logistically, you go, of course, there's that many Craftworlds. Like the galaxy's a big place, and there were quite a lot of Eldar. But it's weird in the same way, like there's like 30 successors named to the Imperial Fist now,
right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So stuff just accumulates over time. So what was very prosaic decisions to make some variant army lists, because we had some extra Eldar releases to support. Over 20 years, 25 years of percolation becomes, it's like, well. Now, of course, that's a light. Of course, I like this, and as we were discussing earlier, actually, what I really like is following those threads. Well, if this, then what?
Right.
If this, then what does that mean? Okay, well, that moves us further along. Oh, that means that's this. Aha, but that have consequences. If this is the case, then that means that must be the case. And then metaphysically, that means that is.
Yeah.
The court of the young king is the other thing. Again, I love the idea of the again the exarchs, because again, and it's going back to the original material, which is White Dwarf 127, and a lot of it which went into the second edition codex, which I just loved, and about the exarchs all gathering and one of them being nominated and being sacrificed to Cain. It's like this brutally gory, like literally
incredible.
The cloak grows, he gets given this, and the spear and all the rest, and he walks in, and it can take days, and and it's so dramatic, and again it's dramatic and amazing, You can tell it's like, that's why I'm an Eldar fan. That's exciting, and so. But that has implications for me. My brain goes, well, okay. Well, if that's the case, then what if this? And then he's connected and he sits in the middle of the Infinity Circuit. He does I'm doing it for something at the moment. Again, it's just like, well, how does it all fit together? What does that mean? And I like and one of the things again I try to hint at, and I don't necessarily like, the other thing like Black Library, we tried to do. But doesn't necessarily always come across. It's like maybe use subtext a bit, but so the whole point. One of the things about I tried to do in the Path of the Eldar series is the idea that the Infinity Circuit, which is at least semi-aware, particularly probably almost pretty much is sentient, manages the craft world. That actually it's manipulating the Eldar. It's an organism. So it's like, well, actually we're it's like. Well, we've just lost a load of warriors. I think I better make some people angry.
Yeah.
What? And so it's constantly monitoring itself and its population and as a system, and has grown to that point that it does that. Oh, hang on, it's like and it's not as literally as like, well, we need to clean up on aisle 4. Let's have people clean. But on this psychic sense, this gestaltness, which again isn't like full tuned hive mind, but just is an interaction, is just a
subconscious psychic
an entity.
Goading. The sense that you have to do the thing.
A society, societies. I always love whenever you're complaining about being in traffic, remember you're somebody else's traffic.
Right.
Yeah. And so you're always a part of society, even when you don't feel like it. And for the Eldar, that's actually reinforced. It's like they always feel like it as well, and that's a very different experience to being as humans who always feel very separated and have moments of connection and stuff like that. They're always connected all the time.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? But that also means they're also absolutely again going back to the original material and why it's like because they're always and also the archetype of the elves from Warhammer that was kind of like
Sure.
was ported into 40k, which is like they're always, but they're kind of like quite politicking, and a lot of them are quite vain, and the downsides of being Eldar and all those extremities are like they're very concerned about what people think about them, and they're very prone to fads and fashions and schools of thought, and again over thousands of years. It's like, this, no, we wouldn't put that sculpture there, and it's like, why not, well, because of the recidivist movement, freedom of the arc and such. What? Yeah, it's bad. It's just bad feng shui. Just believe me,
Yeah.
But they all know it. Because
Right.
again, that's the other thing is they've grown up amongst all of this, all of these references and this mythology and everything else. It's just, we again as humans we forget how much metaphor we live with in our lives, how much
Yes.
symbolism we just absorb
Yeah.
until we run into somebody from a different culture,
Right.
and then you use a turn of phrase and they just look at you
Yes.
like you just said my head's exploded, and you're
Right.
like, well, I don't mean it literally, obviously. And they're like, oh, right. And for the Elder, that again, that's everything. Again, we have to tone it down to make it, for me, again, the presentation of the Elder, just like the presentation of Space Marines and things, are slightly toned down to make them slightly more accessible, and
Right.
so you can
Of
write
course.
stories because it could, it's like I could go very, like Finnegan's Wake on it or whatever, and write just a weird stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
And it would be amazing and an experience, and I would probably.
If you're listening and you haven't tried to read the first page of Finnegan's Wake, you've got to do that. And what Gav said is just extra funny. Yeah, because Space Marines could collapse into just being necklace testosterone fueled space knights.
Yeah.
But in order to be complex and interesting, and Eldar might be, and if they really existed, so inaccessible that they wouldn't be something we could read about. So you make these
Yeah.
concessions. I get it. So we're moving towards running out of time here, and I want to touch on a couple of practical questions that my patrons will murder me if I don't ask you. There are a couple of Eldar gods still alive, right? Kegarak is out there somewhere, and actually,
Technically, yes.
Isha is being tortured by Nurgle. Do you think you've talked about how
one story
one
is one myth
that's
in one Craftworld.
Well, players love this. Are you familiar with Luton at all? Do you watch his stuff at all on YouTube?
Bits of it, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's super cool. This is something that he's checked in on a bit. But I wonder if you think, I know that you've said in past interviews that you are wary of moving the 40k plotline forward too much because then you destroy players' sandbox. And I so agree with that. I don't want big advances in the story. But nevertheless, do you think there's any room for the return of either Isha or Kegarak in the story? Maybe even as a model of, that's what they really want to ask. They want me to ask you if there's ever going to be a model. That's
Right.
That's
Well,
what's going on,
like if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would say, of course not. Of course, there's never going to be a model. But then I would have said, of course, Primarchs aren't coming back.
right.
Where the Eldar Gods are concerned, I like to just walk along the balance beam between reality and myth.
Yeah.
In that they were real, were the old ones, were they not? It's like, again, all the answers are true because actually the Eldar Gods are representations of things that have happened again and again and again. And so then we have to get into actually the metaphysics of 40k, which is like actually representations of the gods in terms of 40k, as most of them are understood, are actually weird swirly things in the warp.
Right.
Yeah, they're accumulations of psychopower that have grown sentient and all the rest of it. That's
It's
what
not
Chaos
for nothing
means.
that the Avatar of Cain and the Bloodthirster used to have identical stat lines.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I put the weapon skill up to 10 and made them better.
Yes,
But
thank
not quite
you.
as crazy. So more skilled, but not as ferocious.
Yeah.
And actually, the model was tiny compared to Bloodthirster back then. But these days, huge again.
Yeah.
Lovely. Oh, yeah, lovely avatar model.
Gorgeous, yeah. Love it.
Again, it's the march of time. Remembering that again, how exciting and amazing the first Jez avatar was, which was
Yeah.
probably about the size of a Primaris Marine. Which made him twice as tall as an Eldar
Yeah.
Guardian. But
Yeah.
anyway, but the idea was there, and it's just been expanded again and again. But the idea is still the same. The idea is still cool. But anyway, sorry, where were we before that?
Yeah, got the gods.
Oh, they're the gods. Yeah. So once we start getting into the physical manifestations of the gods and are they real and what are they, gets very complicated because mostly gods work through champions. So is Kegarak? It begs the question: what is Kegarak to come back? Is Kegarak could just literally be a psychic echo in the webway? Yeah, it could be a
Okay.
thing. Could be. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Is
interesting.
there which has been named Kegarak because, or is Kegarak just an emergent phenomenon that has to exist to explain how Harlequin souls are saved from Slanesh?
Right.
It's like, well, somebody had to save them,
Yeah.
therefore it was Kegarak. And same with the Isha thing again is so to get onto the metaphysics of a little bit, you go, okay, the big swirly storm somewhere in the warp that is Nurgle. Is there a tiny little swirly Eldar bit in there somewhere, which came from something, which has then given rise to this myth of Nurgle capturing Isha, but also what was Isha in the first place. So again, one of the things I hinted at in the Path of the Eldar was the idea that actually the idea of Isha is like the healing properties of the Eldar genetics themselves, and the kind of like the embodiment of that. So taking ideas that are symbols and making them real. So that's different to the Primarchs. So literally, there was a Rebuticulaman, and he's come
Right.
back. The idea of a bloodthirster, which is this particular spin-off of Khorne manifesting in the real world, becomes this big raging demon thing. It works. And so you go, okay. In that case, what does that mean for Eldar Gods? And we know, like I say, the Eldar Gods are dead, apart from, like I say, Kegarak and Isha, potentially, according to one Craftworld. And also, you've got the whole what's going on with the Inari and Inyad and stuff. So do these things, we start to look at Inyad then and go, actually, do they only ever act like the Chaos Gods? Do they only ever act through mortal instruments? Are the Harlequins the embodiment of Kegarak, and actually Kegarak lives on because the Harlequins live on?
Right.
Inyad is rising or has risen, and he had a little avatar thing. There was a bit of it that came out of wherever out is from the warp, in the same way that again talking about stat lines and stuff. It was no coincidence that the avatar was vulnerable to the same stuff that demons were vulnerable.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the avatar was a demon. It's an Eldar
Yeah.
demon of Cain.
Yeah.
Yeah, which may or may not be some kind of little swirly bit that broke off from Khorne that they needed, because but again, Cain is also just the incarnation of the warlike intent and necessity
Right.
of the Eldar. They built a dominion. They conquered parts of the galaxy. They went to war. They fought in the wars of the Old Ones. Therefore, they needed their anger. They needed rage and violence and those things. And so, therefore, they needed Cain to be the lodestone, to be the lightning rod for that.
You just slipped that corn comment in there. That was because for years I have thought that, but that's actually a really big metaphysical claim that's a possibility. I mean, you're talking about this like realm of forms. The problem when we talk about the Eldar Gods is to think about them as material things first, and really it's the other way around. It's like first there is the forms, and then there is the thing, and it's all representational. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And even the stories of Kegarak, it's how Kegarak hiding in the webway, but actually all we know about Kegarak is occasionally will steal a Harlequin soul from Slanesh,
Yeah.
which clearly doesn't happen in the webway. That's a warp phenomenon. That's a thing, like that's the Eye of Terror. And again, as much as the warp doesn't have any geography, but we know where bits of it are in a very confusing way. We know the Eldar were there. Therefore, that's the bit that was destroyed and became the Eye of Terror. Therefore, it makes sense that that's probably where Slanesh is.
Right.
Because Slanesh was the bit that destroyed it, but actually, of course, that's because it's an overlap. Again, that idea of Cain being, like I say, a part of Khorne, because Khorne is essentially composed of all the warlike emotions of all the races, of which humanity became the biggest and gave birth to. We have to be wary of the idea that as soon as you get to the warp, cause and effect become a circle. In that Khorne exists because there was war, and the presence of Khorne feeds into the warlike tendencies of mortal beings, and is in their dreams, and it urges them to fight and all the rest of it. So actually having a sort of a proto version of those which were around, bearing in mind that the warp was a lot calmer when the Eldar were created. When the old ones created it, they hadn't started.
Right.
The creation of the Eldar is one of the things that started churning up the warp and making it start to accumulate these little worlds and pools and stuff like that. And in essence, again, that's one of those metaphysical things that's kind of evolved slightly over the years, but actually it fits quite nicely into sort of like how that would work. So for me, the Eldar were created as a psychic race, with as a species within the warp, that then were plucked out of the warp and given physical bodies. But actually, the souls are so powerful that once they detach from that physical body, they can go into another one. They reincarnate. Yeah. Whether they gain their memories or I don't know. We don't really get into that. There's lots of different belief systems around reincarnation even in our world and things. So but the idea of that psychic power, whereas a human just dissipates and becomes part of the warp, an Eldar soul retains
identity,
coherency and identity and stuff. So again, if enough of those stick together, do they become a god? In the same way that if enough swirly stuff, is Kegarak literally the collective souls of the Harlequins stuck together in the warp as a reflection. But actually, it's not in the warp, because as we say, he's in the webway. So actually, the psychic resonance of the webway somehow contains, because we know the Harlequins again different. They are not the same. They don't rely on spirit stones in the same way that Craftworlds do. They have some other way of not getting eaten by Slaanesh, which is Kegarak, or supposedly Kegarak, who saves their souls, or may save their souls. But is it actually just like, in the same way that is that a bit of a cheat? In the same way that Yukari fled into the webway and all the little pocket kingdoms and stuff like that, because actually it's not quite the warp, and it's not quite real space, and the leeching effect of Slaanesh is much diminished there. It's like, actually, is the Harlequins that are able to exist because they're a little offshoot of that? Did they start off as one of these cults that fled into the webway, and they've grown into the Harlequins, who have Kegarak, and they have this thing, and they have this big backstory to explain why they are, but the reality is they were able to hide from Slaanesh in the webway, and that's what protected them. So Kegarak is an aspect of the webway itself. Who knows?
Yeah.
Just spitballing.
It's such a cool idea. I love where you're going with this. I would love to talk about this for 30 minutes. I had a dozen other topics that I thought we were going to touch on. We didn't get to, but this has been amazing.
You have to get to 20,000 quick.
Yeah, it's I'll have to get to 20,000 so we can get you back to talk about the other stuff. I think we've got to wrap it up, but I have to ask, if you don't mind telling us, what are you working on?
All right, so one of the main things I'm working on at the moment is I'm doing a lot of the narrative and world building, a little bit of game design stuff, alongside Andy Chambers, who's written the rules for a game. Yeah,
your life is so glamorous. Yeah,
I know. So we're basically doing world building the rules for a game and setting called Zeo Genesis, Zeo Genesis, 2 words, which is sort of inspired by sort of 90s, early noughties anime mech suits fighting each other.
Nice.
And that's like a 32mm scale scalable skirmish game. But so if you go to zeogenesis.com, we're actually just starting our next round of public playtesting, so you can actually download the rules, which is like from start scenario all the way through to having like forces list things. So start out, try out the rules, then use the more advanced rules.
So I can link this and we can play your game.
That'd be awesome.
That's incredible.
Some proxy models.
Amazing.
And then there'll be Discord, so you'll be able to feedback via email, or there'll be some Discord channels set up for discussing the games, and we'll be answering questions and stuff. So I mean, it's quite well advanced. We've been working on for a couple of years now. We're hoping to release probably the plan is that we'll hopefully have something to sell at Adepticon. Basically,
Incredible. That's awesome. Yeah.
Getting on that should be quite exciting.
Okay, well, I'll link it in the video description, and we'll go check it out. Gav, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an incredible privilege and an honor, and also just a delight. It's so much fun. I hope maybe someday we see you back on the channel again. It was generous of you to come once, but I mean, certainly.
I would love to.
Eternally invited.
Yes, well, great. I mean, we'll just pick up where we left off at some point.
Amazing.
I love talking about Eldar. I love talking about the background of 40k and what we do with it. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about one of my favourite subjects.
Oh man, it's been incredible. So there it is, everybody. Gav did us a big favor. Thank you so much. If you haven't already liked the video, I hope you'll like the video. If you haven't subscribed, I hope you'll subscribe. If you want early access to content and the opportunity to propose questions in advance for interviews like this one, you could always become a patron. I love my patrons very much. They also keep me honest. Okay, Gav, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll be in touch again, and I'm at least excited for your game. I'll download the rules today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.